Do you remember those cozy fall dinners your grandparents used to make when the air turned crisp and the house smelled like something simmering on the stove? These were the meals that warmed more than just your stomach. They wrapped the whole family in comfort. From bubbling stews to oven-baked casseroles, every dish had a story and a reason to gather around the table. Let's take a trip back to those colder evenings and rediscover 30 forgotten fall dinners that made home feel warmer than any furnace ever could. Beef and barley soup, the Great Depression's blanket in a bowl.
So I'm going to show you how to make a delicious beef and barley soup loaded up.
There's something about a pot of beef and barley soup simmering on the stove that feels like a hug from a world that refused to quit. During the Great Depression, this dish wasn't just dinner, it was survival made savory. Families stretched a single hunk of beef into a week's worth of meals, coaxing every ounce of flavor out of the bones and scraps most people today wouldn't even glance at. Barley, humble and hearty, was the secret weapon, cheap, filling, and nutritious enough to turn a handful of ingredients into something that felt like abundance. In those lean years, kitchens smelled like perseverance. Mothers and grandmothers stirred these pots slowly, not because they had time to spare, but because the longer it cooked, the richer it got, and the less anyone noticed that there wasn't much meat to go around. The broth deepened into something earthy and comforting, the kind of meal that made you forget you were broke, cold, or tired. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Today, you'll find barley sitting quietly on health food shelves, suddenly rebranded as ancient grain. Funny how a Depression staple became trendy once people started calling it rustic. Modern cooks might toss in a splash of wine or a sprig of thyme for flair, but the soul of the soup remains the same. Simple ingredients, slow cooking, and gratitude for what you have. If you ever want to understand how our grandparents endured the hardest winters with grace, make a pot of this. Let it simmer while the wind rattles your windows. When that first spoonful hits, you'll feel what they felt. Warmth, relief, and a reminder that comfort isn't bought. It's simmered, seasoned, and shared. Chicken and dumplings, the Stretch It Sunday classic.
Chicken and dumplings is a dish that I didn't grow up eating, but when I eat it now as an adult, I somehow gush with nostalgia.
Back when a whole chicken was a luxury, Sunday dinner was an event worth planning for. Families didn't waste a single feather, and chicken and dumplings was proof that thrift could taste like comfort itself. One bird might feed 6 people if you stretched it with flour, broth, and patience, and maybe a little prayer. The dish began in farm kitchens where make do was more than a saying. It was survival. You'd boil the chicken down until the meat fell apart, the broth turned golden, and the smell told everyone that home was, at least for tonight, warm and safe. The dumplings were the great equalizer. Simple bits of dough dropped into the bubbling pot, puffing up like soft clouds of relief. No fancy tools, no measuring cups, just a grandmother's hand knowing the feel of right. Each bowl carried the kind of satisfaction that came from turning so little into so much. It wasn't a pretty restaurant, but it filled bellies, quieted worries, and made a plain Sunday feel almost like a celebration. As the decades rolled on, chicken and dumplings became less about survival and more about nostalgia. Canned biscuits and instant broth tried to make it faster, but they never quite captured that slow-simmered magic. The real flavor wasn't in the chicken or the dough. It was in the memory of scraping it together, the laughter around chipped bowls, and the rhythm of spoons clinking against enamel pots. Today, when convenience is king, the recipe still whispers a bit of wisdom. Slow down, stretch what you have, and savor the in-between moments. Because sometimes the richest meals are the ones built from scraps and shared stories, not recipes measured in cups, but in care. Liver and onions, the iron-rich lifesaver. Nobody asked for, but everyone ate. There was a time when liver and onions weren't a dare, they were dinner. In the 1940s and 50s, when meat was rationed or just plain expensive, liver was the thrifty cook's secret weapon. Cheap, packed with iron, and full of flavor, at least according to the generation that grew up on it, it became a weekly ritual in countless homes. Children might have grimaced, but their parents knew better. This was nutrition on a budget, served sizzling in cast iron with a halo of golden onions on top. The magic, if you can call it that, was in the onions. They were the camouflage, the sweet caramelized curtain drawn over the strong mineral punch of the liver. A patient home cook would soak the slices in milk to tame the bitterness, dredge them lightly in flour, and fry them until tender but not tough. The scent filled the house with something unmistakable, half comfort, half complaint from the kids who couldn't escape it. Still, when served with mashed potatoes and brown gravy, even the skeptics took a few bites. What's funny is how this once humble dish has nearly vanished, pushed aside by boneless cuts and delivery apps. Yet nutritionists now call liver a superfood, and chefs charge premium prices to bring it back under fancier names. Our grandparents would probably laugh at that because for them, it wasn't a trend. It was Tuesday. If you ever find yourself craving something real, something that tastes like history and stubbornness, try frying up a few slices. The smell will transport you to a kitchen where nothing was wasted and every bite meant something. Liver and onions wasn't about luxury, it was about strength, thrift, and the courage to eat what life served. Neck bone stew, flavor pulled from the bone. Neck bones stew wasn't a recipe born from luxury, it was born from survival. When times were lean and meat was scarce, people turned to what butchers tossed aside, the bones. Those humble scraps, once simmered low and slow, revealed something beautiful. Meat tender enough to fall apart and broth rich enough to feed a family twice over. This was the food of the working class, the farmers, and the forgotten. It filled stomachs, warmed homes, and reminded folks that flavor could be coaxed from even the simplest things. In Black and Southern kitchens especially, neck bone stew became more than sustenance. It was heritage in a pot, a slow-simmered song of resilience, flavored with onions, garlic, and love. The stew pot sat on the back burner for hours, bubbling quietly while stories, laughter, and the day's worries mingled in the air. The smell alone could pull people to the table before the cook even called. It wasn't fancy, but it was sacred. The kind of meal that turned struggle into strength. The secret to its power wasn't just the seasoning, it was patience. You couldn't rush neck bones. The marrow needed time to surrender, the meat needed coaxing, and when the stew was ready, it wasn't just food. It was proof that care could transform scarcity into comfort. Today, neck bone stew rarely shows up on modern tables. Too many people forgot how to wait for flavor or dismissed it as poor folks' food. But in truth, it's the kind of dish that built generations. One taste and you understand. It's not about the cut of meat, it's about what you make of it. A bowl of neck bone stew is a reminder that even in the hardest seasons, there's still richness to be found, bone deep and beautiful. Cabbage roll casserole, immigrant comfort in a pan. Cabbage roll casserole may not win beauty contests, but it wins where it counts, in heart and history. It's the kind of dish that tells the story of immigrant kitchens, where flavor met frugality and nothing ever went to waste. Long before frozen dinners or instant rice, families from Eastern Europe brought over the art of stuffed cabbage, tender leaves wrapped around ground meat, rice, and tomato sauce. But when workdays got longer and energy ran low, those same cooks got practical. Why roll every leaf when you could layer it all in one pan and call it dinner? Thus, the casserole was born, a shortcut that didn't cut out the soul. This dish became a weeknight hero in post-war America, especially in factory towns and rural neighborhoods where budgets were thin but appetites were large. The ingredients were cheap: cabbage, rice, a bit of ground beef, and canned tomatoes. Yet when baked together, they transformed into something that smelled like comfort and tasted like home. You could almost hear the sighs of relief around the dinner table as steam rose from each serving. There's a kind of poetry in how this meal balances simplicity and survival. The cabbage softens into sweetness, the rice absorbs every drop of tomato broth, and the meat gives just enough richness to make you feel full. It's not glamorous, but it's deeply human. A meal made from what's available, made to share, made to last. Today, food influencers might call it deconstructed stuffed cabbage, but your grandmother would just smile. She knew it by another name: dinner. Cabbage roll casserole isn't about nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. It's about remembering that warmth doesn't come from the ingredients themselves, but from the hands that layered them, one humble scoop at a time. time. Hobo stew, a campfire feast for hard times. If soup had a rebel cousin, it'd be hobo stew, the everything-goes dish that defined the Great Depression's creativity. Born along railways and in makeshift camps, this stew came from people who had next to nothing but refused to go hungry. Hobos, travelers, and out-of-work families would gather around a fire, tossing whatever they had into a shared pot. Beans, potatoes, a scrap of meat, a can of tomatoes, maybe a carrot if luck was kind. The result wasn't fancy, but it was enough to keep the cold and despair at bay. What made hobo stew remarkable wasn't the recipe, it was the spirit behind it. Each pot was a small act of community, proof that even in hardship, people found ways to share. The rules were simple: bring something, anything, and throw it in. Together, all those scraps turned into something hearty and hopeful. Around those fires, stories were swapped, laughter echoed, and for a while, life didn't feel so cruel. The stew wasn't just food, it was solidarity served hot. When the idea drifted into home kitchens, the name stuck, though the circumstances changed. Moms stretched their pantry shelves with the same principle: a little of this, a bit of that. It became a budget staple that filled bellies and stretched paychecks. Today, hobo stew survives at church potlucks, scout camps, and backyard gatherings. People still toss ingredients into a pot without measuring, still find comfort in the randomness of it all. In a world obsessed with recipes and ratios, hobo stew remains gloriously unbothered. It's a reminder that good food doesn't need precision, just warmth, a fire, and a few folks willing to share what they've got. Because sometimes the best meals are born from nothing more than kindness and a tin can. Ham, hock, and beans, the smoky supper that fed a town. There's something deeply reassuring about a pot of ham, hock, and beans simmering away, like the sound of an old song you didn't know you missed. For generations, this dish was the working man's supper, the farmer's payday feast, and the small town staple that stretched a dime into dinner. A single ham hock, salty, smoky, and full of flavor, was all it took to turn a pot of humble dried beans into something rich enough to feed a crowd. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest, the kind of food that made the whole kitchen smell like home. In South and rural America, this dish carried the rhythm of the seasons. After a hog butchering, nothing went to waste. Every bone, every scrap had a purpose. The hocks, often overlooked, became treasure once they hit a pot of beans. Slowly, the meat softened, the marrow melted, and the broth turned silky with flavor. You didn't need much else, maybe an onion, a pinch of pepper, or a bay leaf if you were feeling extravagant. By supper time, the air was thick with that comforting aroma that said, "We made it through another day." It was food for neighbors and families alike. Pots were shared across fences and between church gatherings, a gesture that meant more than words. And when money was short, those same beans kept people full, strong, and proud. Today, ham, hock, and beans is a nostalgia trip in a Dutch oven. You might see it on soul food menus or slow cooker blogs, but the heart remains unchanged. Thrift, patience, and gratitude. One bite and you taste more than beans. You taste resourcefulness, resilience, and the quiet genius of making something beautiful out of what others overlooked. Goulash, when every mom became a magician. Before TikTok recipes and one-pan hacks, there was goulash, the original kitchen magic trick. This dish turned a pound of ground beef, a box of macaroni, and a can of tomato sauce into enough dinner to feed an army of hungry kids. It didn't matter if you were in a bustling city apartment or a dusty Midwest farmhouse. If your mom could make goulash, she could stretch a dollar like nobody's business. The roots of this humble meal reach back to Hungarian herdsmen who simmered meat and paprika over open fires. But by the time it landed in mid-century America, it had shape-shifted into something uniquely domestic. The paprika mellowed, the spices softened, and the recipe evolved into an all-in-one comfort casserole, half European, half pure American invention. Every household had its version. Some added corn, others used ketchup, and a few rebels snuck in cheese. No two pots of goulash ever tasted the same, and that was part of its charm. The beauty of it wasn't just in the ingredients, it was in the atmosphere it created. While noodles bubbled and sauce thickened, the kitchen filled with that cozy tomato scent that meant you'd made it through another day. Plates were filled, seconds were inevitable, and leftovers were a victory, not a burden. Today, goulash has been overshadowed by flashier pasta dishes, but it still holds a special place in the memory of anyone who grew up scraping scraping sauce from a Corelle plate. In an age where we measure recipes by likes and aesthetics, goulash remains gloriously unpretentious. It's proof that comfort doesn't come from perfect plating. It comes from feeding your family with what you have, stirring love into every humble, tomato-stained spoonful. Pot roast with root vegetables. Slow and steady wins the dinner. In the days before pressure cookers and microwave shortcuts, pot roast was the kind of meal that tested your patience and rewarded it tenfold. It began early on Sunday mornings when a cheap cut of beef met a Dutch oven, a splash of broth, and a chorus of root vegetables. Carrots, potatoes, onions, and turnips all joined the slow dance, softening and sweetening hour by hour. By late afternoon, the whole house smelled like comfort itself. Warm, savory, and rich enough to make neighbors suddenly stop by to say hello. This was Depression-era ingenuity wrapped in tenderness. Families learned that toughness could be tamed both in life and in meat with enough time and heat. A chuck roast that might have been leathery on day one became buttery and yielding by dinner time. The vegetables weren't just filler, they were sponges for all that flavor, turning simple produce into something grand. You didn't need fancy seasonings or wine reductions, just salt, pepper, and faith in the slow simmer. Every family had their version. Some swore by browning the meat first, others by slipping in a splash of vinegar or a spoon of tomato paste. But one thing stayed constant: the ritual of waiting. The anticipation that built as the roast filled the house with its promise. And when it was finally ready, silence would fall around the table, just clinking forks and soft sighs of satisfaction. Today's world prizes speed, but pot roast refuses to rush. It's a delicious rebellion against instant gratification. One bite reminds you that the best things, like tenderness, warmth, and family, can't be hurried. They have to be earned, hour by hour, until what starts tough becomes something worth savoring. Slow and steady didn't just win the dinner, it defined it. Corn chowder, sunshine in a soup bowl. There's something wonderfully simple about corn chowder, a dish that feels like a warm smile in the middle of a gray day. It was the kind of soup that could bridge the seasons, showing up in both summer kitchens filled with fresh sweet corn and winter tables stocked with cans from the pantry. No matter the time of year, its golden color and creamy sweetness made everything seem just a bit brighter. Corn chowder was born from thrift and abundance all at once. Farmers made it to stretch the bounty of their harvests, and city families leaned on it when a can of corn was all they had left before payday. Potatoes gave it body, milk gave it comfort, and bacon, if you had it, gave it that smoky whisper of luxury. Nothing fancy, nothing wasted, just a pot of pure contentment bubbling gently on the stove. For many, it wasn't just a recipe, it was a ritual. The chopping of onions, the hiss of butter in a pan, the first whiff of corn mingling with cream. Kids would wander into the kitchen asking, "Is it ready yet?" knowing full well they'd be scalding their tongues on that first eager spoonful. And once served, it didn't need sides or garnishes. A few crackers, maybe a sprinkle of pepper, and dinner was done. Today, corn chowder has become a comfort food classic, often dressed up with herbs or roasted peppers, but its soul remains the same. It's a dish that asks for very little and gives back warmth, sweetness, and a memory of simpler times. One spoonful, and you can almost hear the echo of old kitchens where comfort didn't come from abundance, but from care. Chicken pot pie, a golden crust hiding a family secret. Few dishes hold the power of chicken pot pie. The sight of that golden, bubbling crust was enough to make even the crankiest family member perk up at dinner time. It wasn't just a meal, it was an event. The moment you cracked that flaky top and a wave of steam rose up, carrying the scent of chicken, cream, and vegetables, you knew you were in for something special. Chicken pot pie was the great equalizer of American kitchens. Whether baked from scratch or born from leftovers, it turned scraps into supper with the help of a little ingenuity and a lot of butter. Post-war housewives mastered it with canned soup and frozen peas. Earlier generations built it from stewed hens and garden carrots. Either way, it was comfort cloaked in pastry, a humble luxury that could make even hard weeks feel softer. Every family had its own ritual. Some used pie crusts, others biscuit tops, and a few clever cooks swapped in puff pastry when they were feeling fancy. The filling was a story of practicality. Whatever was on hand, potatoes, celery, onion, swam together together in a creamy sauce that felt like a hug you could eat. Leftover roast chicken never looked so proud. When it hit the table, all conversation paused. Forks broke through crusts, spoons dipped into thick gravy, and that first bite reminded everyone why the dish endured through decades of changing tastes. It wasn't flashy or new, it was reliable like the people who made it. Today, chicken pot pie remains a timeless classic, equally at home in a diner or on a holiday table. Beneath its crust lies the heart of American cooking, resourceful, comforting, and a little indulgent when you need it most. Stuffed bell peppers, the original one-pan miracle. Before air fryers and meal kits promised dinner in 30 minutes, there were stuffed bell peppers, nature's own edible bowls that turned a handful of pantry staples into a Sunday-worthy meal. Bright, plump peppers stood tall in casserole dishes across mid-century kitchens, filled to the brim with rice, ground beef, tomato sauce, and the ever-essential sprinkle of cheese. Simple, hearty, and endlessly adaptable, this dish was the quiet overachiever of American comfort food. Stuffed bell peppers likely took root in immigrant kitchens, where frugality met creativity. Eastern European and Mediterranean cooks had been stuffing vegetables for centuries: cabbage, eggplant, grape leaves, and the American version was simply a thrifty twist. Take what's cheap, make it beautiful, and stretch it to feed a crowd. In the 1950s and 60s, as convenience cooking reigned supreme, canned tomato soup and instant rice found their way into the mix. Housewives could whip up a tray of peppers in no time, making it a go-to for busy weeknights or potluck dinners. There was something satisfying about the ritual. The simmering of the tomato sauce, the careful spooning of filling into each hollow pepper, and that final bake until everything melded into one glorious, saucy harmony. When you sliced into a pepper, steam rose like applause. Inside waited that perfect balance: tangy tomato, savory beef, and soft rice, all tucked neatly inside a tender shell that did double duty as both flavor and presentation. Even today, stuffed bell peppers hold their ground. They've been reborn in countless ways: vegan, keto, quinoa-filled, or spiced up with global flair. But the spirit remains the same: a complete meal that celebrates simplicity and resourcefulness. Every bite whispers of a time when dinner didn't need gadgets, just a good idea and a hot oven. Rabbit stew, a supper from the woods. There was a time when rabbit stew wasn't a novelty, it was just dinner. Long before farm to table became a trend, families practiced it out of necessity, and if a rabbit crossed your path, it meant a hearty meal was on the way. This dish was the definition of old-fashioned practicality: a little meat, a few root vegetables, and hours of slow simmering that turned humble ingredients into something quietly magnificent. Rabbit stew was common in rural America, especially during the Great Depression and wartime rationing. Chicken was for Sunday, beef was a luxury, but rabbit, you could hunt it yourself. It was lean, abundant, and adaptable. Country cooks made the most of every bit, flouring and browning the meat before letting it bubble away with onions, carrots, and potatoes in a broth that thickened with patience, not cornstarch. By the time it hit the table, the meat was tender enough to fall apart at the touch of a spoon. There was comfort in its simplicity, but also pride. Nothing went to waste, and flavor was earned, not bought. Some families added a splash of wine or cider. Others stretched the pot with dumplings or wild herbs. The smell alone could fill a farmhouse with anticipation, a reminder that slow cooking wasn't about luxury. It was about living well with what you had. Today, rabbit stew has become a curiosity for many, more likely to appear on a chef's seasonal menu than a kitchen stove. But its story is worth remembering. It speaks of resilience and self-reliance, of communities that found warmth in what the land provided. One spoonful, and you can almost hear the crackle of a wood stove and the quiet satisfaction of making something out of nearly nothing. Salisbury steak, the TV dinner's crown jewel. Before it was a punchline or a frozen entree wrapped in foil, Salisbury steak was a serious meal with serious intentions. Named after Dr. James Henry Salisbury, a 19th century physician who believed in the healing powers of lean beef, this dish began as a health food. Yes, really, a diet plan before TikTok made that sort of thing fashionable. But what started as doctor's orders soon turned into a dinner time staple, reinvented in the kitchens of frugal home cooks and the golden age of TV dinners. At its heart, Salisbury steak steak is gloriously simple. Ground beef seasoned, shaped into oblong patties, and browned to a crust before simmering in rich onion gravy. Think of it as meatloaf's more sophisticated cousin, the one who left home, got a job, and still visits on weekends. The beauty of it was balance, affordable enough for tight budgets, hearty enough to feed a family, and just fancy enough to feel like a real steak. In the 1950s and 60s, when frozen dinners became America's new kitchen convenience, Salisbury steak took center stage. It was hearty, reheated well, and paired perfectly with mashed potatoes and a side of glossy peas. Housewives could serve it in minutes, and no one complained. For latchkey kids of the 70s, that smell of gravy bubbling in the microwave was practically a hug. Today, the dish has made a quiet comeback. Food bloggers swap canned gravy for scratch-made sauce and pair it with artisan mashed potatoes, but the spirit remains the same: comfort, economy, and nostalgia. Salisbury steak may never win culinary awards, but it will always win over hungry hearts. It's proof that a humble patty dressed in a little gravy can carry the weight of decades of American home cooking pride. Navy bean soup, the humble hero of hard times. Navy bean soup might not sound glamorous, but it has quietly carried America through its toughest winters. From ship galleys to farmhouse kitchens, this simple pot of beans, onions, and ham bones has fed more cold hands and hungry bellies than most fancy dishes ever could. It was cheap, filling, and, when done right, rich, with a depth of flavor that felt far grander than the sum of its parts. Its name comes from the U.S. Navy, which served it aboard ships as early as the 1800s. The reason was pure practicality. Dried Navy beans were lightweight, shelf-stable, and full of protein, perfect for feeding crews at sea for months. But the soup didn't stay confined to ships. During the Great Depression and wartime rationing, it became a fixture in home kitchens too. All you needed was a pot, a few vegetables, and a leftover ham hock, or even just the bone, to coax out a smoky, savory broth. The magic of Navy bean soup lies in patience. You don't rush it. You let the beans soften, the broth thicken, and the flavors mingle until the house smells like warmth itself. Some cooks added carrots or celery. Others swore by a splash of vinegar at the end to wake everything up. Served with a hunk of cornbread or a slice of buttered toast, it was the kind of meal that could make you forget there wasn't much else in the pantry. Even today, Navy bean soup stands as a quiet symbol of resilience. It's peasant food, sailor food, and comfort food all rolled into one. Proof that simplicity, when handled with care, can taste like home. In a world chasing gourmet trends, maybe it's time we remember the power of a slow-simmered pot of beans. Cabbage and sausage skillet, the weeknight workhorse. If there's a smell that defines a working kitchen in winter, it's the sizzle of cabbage and sausage in a hot skillet. It's a meal that starts with humble intentions and ends up feeling like a feast. No oven, no fuss, just hearty food cooked fast. Generations of thrifty cooks relied on this dish for good reason. It's cheap, filling, and deeply satisfying. The kind of dinner that warms you from the inside out. The roots of this recipe stretch across Europe. German, Polish, and Eastern European immigrants all brought their versions to America. In those old country kitchens, cabbage was a staple and sausage was a treat. When paired, they became a perfect marriage of frugality and flavor. During lean years, cabbage stretched a bit of meat a long way, while the sausage's fat and spices transformed simple vegetables into something rich and comforting. In practice, it's beautifully simple. You brown the sausage first, letting those edges crisp just enough to perfume the air. Then toss in sliced cabbage, onions, maybe a few potatoes if you've got them. A splash of vinegar or mustard cuts through the richness, while a pinch of pepper or caraway brings everything together. Within minutes, you've got a complete meal in one pan. No measuring, no worrying, just instinctive cooking at its best. Modern cooks have dressed it up, of course, using artisan kielbasa, purple cabbage, or a drizzle of honey glaze, but the soul of the dish hasn't changed. It's fast food the old-fashioned way, made on a stovetop instead of through a drive-through window. Cabbage and sausage skillet proves what our grandparents knew all along. You don't need fancy ingredients to make something memorable. Just a hot pan, a hearty appetite, and a little know-how. Potato pancakes, the golden crisp of frugality. Potato pancakes were born from necessity but remembered for their irresistible crunch. They came steam sizzling out of cast iron skillets across immigrant kitchens, farmhouses, and city flats alike. A humble way to stretch a few leftover potatoes into something that tasted like celebration. Known as latkes in Jewish homes and Kartoffelpuffer in German ones, these golden rounds united generations under the same simple truth: fried potatoes make everything better. The recipe couldn't be more basic: grated potatoes, a bit of onion, egg, flour, salt, and a hot pan. But the magic was in the method. The potatoes had to be squeezed dry, the oil had to sing, and timing was everything. Get it right, and you'd be rewarded with crisp edges, tender centers, and that unmistakable aroma that could pull the whole family to the kitchen before the first batch even hit the plate. During the Great Depression and wartime, potato pancakes were a lifesaver. They required no fancy ingredients, just ingenuity and a few pantry staples. Leftover mashed potatoes, they'd work too. Some cooks added a dash of baking powder for fluff. Others mixed in herbs or cheese when they could spare it. Served with applesauce, sour cream, or simply a sprinkle of salt, they were comfort food in its purest form. Affordable, filling, and endlessly versatile. Today, potato pancakes still hold their charm, though they've been dressed up for brunch menus and food blogs. But whether topped with smoked salmon or eaten straight from a paper towel over the stove, their essence remains the same. Each crisp bite carries a story of thrift turned into triumph, a golden reminder that the best meals often start with what's left at the bottom of the bin. Macaroni and tomatoes, the poor man's pasta, that fed a nation. Macaroni and tomatoes isn't glamorous, but that's exactly why it mattered. This simple pot of elbow noodles and stewed tomatoes was a Depression-era miracle, cheap, filling, and dependable when little else was. For families trying to stretch a dollar and still put something warm on the table, it was the definition of comfort in hard times. Its roots go back to southern kitchens and the rural Midwest, where canned tomatoes and dry pasta were two pantry staples that never went bad. With just a bit of butter or bacon grease, some salt, and maybe a pinch of sugar to tame the acidity, dinner could be ready in 20 minutes. Some cooks added onions or a crumble of salt pork if they had it, while others swore by a dusting of black pepper or cheese on top. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest, and that counted for a lot. Macaroni and tomatoes carried more emotional weight than its short ingredient list might suggest. It fed mill workers and farmers, single mothers and school children. It showed up on the table after church and in lunch pails the next day. It was food that didn't judge your budget, only promised to fill your stomach. Over time, the dish evolved. Some turned it creamy, others baked it into casseroles, but the soul of it never changed. An act of culinary thrift that made something out of almost nothing. In a world now obsessed with imported pasta and artisan sauces, there's a quiet power in revisiting this humble meal. One forkful of buttery noodles swimming in tangy tomatoes, and you can taste both the hardship and the hope of generations past. It may be simple, but simplicity is exactly what made it unforgettable. Venison chili, the hunter's reward. Long before chili competitions and game day crockpots, venison chili was a working man's reward for patience and good aim. In hunting season, when the days grew short and the air smelled like wood smoke, this was the meal waiting at the end of a long day in the woods. It was rustic, hearty, and full of flavor, proof that nature provided everything you needed if you were willing to put in the effort. Venison, leaner and richer than beef, gave chili a depth that couldn't be faked. Hunters knew how to make every bit count. A pot of venison chili started with what was on hand: onions, beans, canned tomatoes, maybe some peppers or corn if the pantry allowed. The meat was browned low and slow, spiced generously, and simmered until the flavors blended into something smoky and comforting. Every household had its secret ingredient: a dash of coffee, a square of chocolate, or a spoonful of molasses to mellow the heat. This dish was more than food, it was fellowship. It was served in hunting lodges, camp kitchens, and farmhouse tables where stories flowed as freely as the chili itself. Leftovers always tasted better the next day, after the flavors had a chance to deepen, thickening like the memories that came with them. Today, venison chili sits at the crossroads of old and new, still a favorite in rural kitchens, but also a star in modern, wild game cookbooks. Whether served with cornbread or a sprinkle of sharp cheddar, it carries the same spirit, a celebration of resourcefulness in the outdoors. Each Each steaming bowl reminds us that sometimes the best meals come not from a grocery store, but from the rhythm of the land itself. A reminder of how deeply food and survival were once entwined. Split pea soup with ham, the leftover that became a legend. Split pea soup with ham isn't flashy. It's steady, dependable, and quietly soulful. It's the kind of dish that doesn't announce itself, yet fills a home with the smell of something worth waiting for. Born out of thrift and tradition, this humble soup transformed kitchen scraps into nourishment that could stretch for days, proving that waste was never an option when you cooked with care. Its roots run deep, from old-world European kitchens to American homesteads where every ham bone earned its second life. After Sunday dinner, the leftover bone went straight into a pot with dried split peas, carrots, celery, and onions. Hours of gentle simmering turned those peas from pale green pebbles into a creamy, hearty stew, the kind that could feed a family with little more than water, patience, and salt. The ham bone worked its quiet magic, lending smoky depth and a reminder that flavor doesn't have to be bought. It can be coaxed out of what's already there. In times of scarcity, this soup was a lifeline. During the Great Depression and wartime rationing, it made use of everything: bones, scraps, and time. It was food that reflected resilience, simple, sustaining, and kind to the budget. Some cooks pureed it smooth, others kept it rustic and chunky, but all agreed that it was best served with crusty bread and maybe a drizzle of love, or bacon grease if you were lucky. Today, split pea soup with ham still shows up in diners and family kitchens alike, a quiet survivor from another era. One spoonful, and you can taste the story of those who came before us, people who turned leftovers into legends and found comfort in the slow rhythm of a simmering pot. Baked oxtail, the luxury born from scraps. Once upon a time, oxtail wasn't a delicacy. It was what you took home when the butcher had nothing left. This humble cut, the tail of the ox or cow, was considered scrap meat, all bone and sinew. But in the right hands, it became magic. Baked oxtail was the reward for patience, a slow-cooked miracle that turned toughness into tenderness and thrift into something close to luxury. Across cultures, from southern kitchens to Caribbean homes and European taverns, oxtail found a place in the pot. It was prized not for its size, but for its flavor. That marrow-rich meat, when baked or braised for hours, released a deep, silky broth that no prime cut could match. Traditional recipes called for simple ingredients: onions, carrots, celery, maybe a splash of wine or Worcestershire, and thyme, lots of it. You'd sear the oxtails until brown and fragrant, then let them bake low and slow until the meat fell from the bone with the lightest touch. This was not fast food. It was the kind of meal that filled the house with a scent so comforting you could almost taste it before dinner was served. Families gathered around it like a ritual, ladling the tender meat and gravy over rice, potatoes, or cornbread. The richness felt indulgent, even if the ingredients were humble. Today, oxtail has found its way onto high-end menus, sold for a small fortune. But every bite still tells the same story, a tale of frugality, creativity, and respect for the whole animal. Baked oxtail reminds us that good food was never about status. It was about skill, patience, and love, simmered into every drop of sauce. What was once poor man's fare has rightfully become a dish fit for kings. Baked oxtail, the luxury born from scraps. Once upon a time, oxtail wasn't a delicacy. It was what you took home when the butcher had nothing left. This humble cut, the tail of the ox or cow, was considered scrap meat, all bone and sinew. But in the right hands, it became magic. Baked oxtail was the reward for patience, a slow-cooked miracle that turned toughness into tenderness and thrift into something close to luxury. Across cultures, from southern kitchens to Caribbean homes and European taverns, oxtail found a place in the pot. It was prized not for its size, but for its flavor. That marrow-rich meat, when baked or braised for hours, released a deep, silky broth that no prime cut could match. Traditional recipes called for simple ingredients: onions, carrots, celery, maybe a splash of wine or Worcestershire, and thyme, lots of it. You'd sear the oxtails until brown and fragrant, then let them bake low and slow until the meat fell from the bone with the lightest touch. This was not fast food. It was the kind of meal that filled the house with a scent so comforting you could almost taste it before dinner dinner was served. Families gathered around it like a ritual, ladling the tender meat and gravy over rice, potatoes, or cornbread. The richness felt indulgent, even if the ingredients were humble. Today, oxtail has found its way onto high-end menus, sold for a small fortune. But every bite still tells the same story, a tale of frugality, creativity, and respect for the whole animal. Baked oxtail reminds us that good food was never about status. It was about skill, patience, and love simmered into every drop of sauce. What was once poor man's fare has rightfully become a dish fit for kings. Baked apples with cinnamon, the sweet scent of simplicity. Before there were fancy desserts and frosted pastries, there were baked apples, humble, wholesome, and every bit as comforting as a slice of pie without the fuss. This was the kind of dessert your grandmother could make with her eyes closed, using nothing but a few pantry staples and a good sense of timing. The smell alone, warm cinnamon mingling with bubbling fruit, was enough to make any old house feel like home again. Baked apples were a Depression-era and wartime favorite, born from scarcity and sustained by creativity. When sugar and butter were rationed, you made do. An apple was cored and filled with a simple mix of brown sugar, butter, and cinnamon. Maybe a few oats or raisins if you had them. Then it was baked until the fruit softened and the filling caramelized into sticky golden sweetness. Served hot with cream, milk, or even a splash of evaporated milk, it was proof that dessert didn't need to be complicated to feel indulgent. For many families, this dish carried more meaning than flavor. It was about turning what little you had into something memorable, using nature's candy when candy itself was out of reach. Kids would crowd around the oven, watching through the glass as the apples slumped and sizzled, their skins blistering like red ornaments. Today, baked apples have found their way back into the spotlight, often dressed up with granola, nuts, or maple drizzle. But their essence hasn't changed. Each bite tastes like nostalgia, a reminder of how sweetness once came from the simplest thing. It's a dessert that whispers of wood stoves, worn aprons, and the quiet pride of making something beautiful from what you already had. Beef stew, with dumplings, the meal that waited all day. Few smells can match the slow, rich promise of beef stew simmering on the stove. Add a layer of soft, pillowy dumplings on top, and you've got a dish that could make even the coldest evening feel like a celebration. Beef stew with dumplings wasn't a quick dinner. It was an all-day affair, the kind of meal that rewarded patience and filled a home with warmth long before it ever hit the table. This dish traces its roots through British and American farm kitchens, where thrift and hardiness ruled. Tough cuts of beef, shoulder, chuck, or shank, were browned and left to simmer for hours with carrots, onions, potatoes, and whatever root vegetables the seller had left. The slow cooking worked like a miracle, coaxing tenderness and flavor from the cheapest cuts. But the real charm came when the dumplings joined the pot. Made from flour, fat, and a bit of milk or broth, they puffed up in the steam, soaking in the gravy while staying soft and fluffy inside. For many families, this stew was more than food. It was an anchor. It filled bellies, stretched budgets, and carried the quiet satisfaction of something made with care. During hard times, it was a way to make a pound of meat feed six. During better times, it was pure comfort ladled into deep bowls and eaten slowly. Even now, one bite of beef stew with dumplings feels like time travel. It's rustic, simple, and deeply human. A reminder of when cooking wasn't just about eating, but about tending, waiting, and sharing. In a world that prizes speed, this dish insists on patience and rewards it with the kind of flavor that can't be rushed. Turkey and rice bake, the day after Thanksgiving. Hero, if necessity is the mother of invention, then the turkey and rice bake is her proudest child. Born out of leftover season, this humble casserole turned scraps of holiday abundance into something new, comforting, creamy, and impossibly satisfying. It wasn't just a recipe, it was a ritual of resourcefulness, the quiet art of making yesterday's feast stretch into tomorrow's dinner. In the years after World War II, when homemakers mastered the magic of canned soup and Pyrex dishes, casseroles like this one became the cornerstone of post-holiday cooking. Shredded turkey met a can of cream of mushroom soup, a handful of rice, and a sprinkle of cheese before baking into a golden, bubbling masterpiece. Some added peas, others corn or celery, and the thriftiest cooks mixed in a bit of leftover stuffing for good measure. The result? A one-pan miracle that didn't just use up leftovers, it made them feel brand new. Turkey and rice bake wasn't flashy, but it spoke to a certain domestic genius. It fed families through the lean weeks after big celebrations, turned too much turkey into a blessing, and filled kitchens with the warm, savory smell of second chances. You didn't need fancy ingredients or perfect technique, just an oven, a casserole dish, and a sense of thrift. Even today, when meal kits and delivery apps reign supreme, this dish holds its ground. It's not about novelty, it's about comfort, economy, and the satisfaction of knowing you made something wonderful out of what you already had. In every creamy spoonful lies a little history lesson that good food isn't always about fresh starts. Sometimes it's about what you do with what's left behind. Sweet potato hash, breakfast, supper, and everything in between. Before brunch became a lifestyle, there was hash, the great equalizer of the kitchen. And sweet potato hash? That was the soulful cousin of the classic version, bright with color and rich with history. Born out of Southern kitchens and Depression-era thrift, it took a simple root and made it shine. No fancy ingredients, no waste, just sweet potatoes, a hot skillet, and the wisdom to make something satisfying from next to nothing. In its earliest days, sweet potato hash was a dish of convenience and necessity. Farmers used what they had: leftover meat, onions, and yesterday's cooked sweet potatoes. Everything was chopped, tossed together in bacon drippings or lard, and fried until crisp at the edges and soft in the middle. The result was sweet, smoky, and savory all at once. The kind of meal that didn't need a recipe, just instinct and a good wooden spoon. Its beauty was in its flexibility. You could serve it with eggs for breakfast, as a side for supper, or all by itself if money was tight. A little ham or sausage turned it into a feast. A drizzle of molasses made it dessert adjacent. It was comfort food with no pretensions, born in cast iron, and meant to be eaten hot, straight from the pan if no one was looking. Today, sweet potato hash has found new life on brunch menus, dressed up with kale or avocado, but its roots remain the same, a dish built on resilience and creativity. Every caramelized cube and crispy bite tells the same story our grandparents knew by heart. Good food isn't about excess, it's about care. In that way, sweet potato hash is timeless, a golden, sizzling reminder of how delicious resourcefulness can be. Cottage cheese casserole, the unsung hero of church suppers. Cottage cheese casserole might not win any beauty contests, but what it lacks in glamour, it makes up for in sheer comfort. It's the kind of dish that quietly appeared on the buffet table at every church potluck, family reunion, or community supper. Humble, creamy, and dependable. You could always count on it to hold its own among hams, jello molds, and green bean casseroles. The recipe's roots reach back to the 1940s and 50s, when frugality met the rise of convenience foods. Cottage cheese, cheap, high in protein, and easy to find, became a star ingredient in casseroles and bakes. Mixed with noodles, eggs, sour cream, and sometimes a handful of cheddar or spinach, it is baked into a dish that straddles the line between lasagna and macaroni pie. Housewives loved it because it stretched ingredients and reheated beautifully. It was comfort that fit neatly in a Pyrex dish. Every region had its spin. Some added tomato sauce or herbs for a faux Italian flair, while others leaned sweet, with a touch of cinnamon and sugar for breakfast or brunch. Either way, the casserole carried a kind of small-town charm, simple, thrifty, and deeply satisfying. It was the dish you could make from whatever you had, and it always tasted like home. Today, cottage cheese is having a quiet comeback, praised by health nuts and nostalgic cooks alike. And there's something poetic about that, because this casserole, for all its simplicity, holds a legacy. It reminds us that good food doesn't need to impress, it just needs comfort. One creamy golden forkful at a time, cottage cheese casserole proves that modest meals can have the biggest hearts. Hog maw and chitterlings, a feast of heritage and resilience. Hog maw and chitterlings, two dishes that once defined frugality, creativity, and cultural pride in the American kitchen. To some, they were poor folks' food. To those who knew better, they were a celebration of skill and resourcefulness, a testament to making the most out of what the land or the master's leftovers provided. Born in the deep South and carried through African American and Appalachian traditions, these dishes turned humble hog parts into something soulful and sustaining. Hog maw, the pig's stomach, was cleaned, stuffed, and been boiled or baked until tender, often alongside potatoes or onions. Chitterlings, or chitlins, the small intestines, demanded hours of washing and simmering before they transformed into a delicacy fragrant with vinegar, garlic, and spice. Together, they filled homes with a scent that was unmistakable, proud, and steeped in history. These weren't meals for the faint of heart. They were labor-intensive, aromatic, and unapologetically authentic. Yet in their preparation was an act of defiance and dignity. For generations of Black families in the South, cooking hog maw and chitterlings meant honoring ancestors who turned hardship into art. What began as survival food became a cherished holiday staple, especially around Christmas and New Year's, when families gathered to share not just a meal, but a story of endurance. In today's world of fast food and food fads, hog maw and chitterlings remain powerful reminders of where true comfort food comes from. They carry the weight of memory and the flavor of history, bold, earthy, and deeply human. Every bite speaks of hands that worked hard, kitchens that made do, and the unshakable truth that good food isn't about luxury. It's about legacy, love, and making something extraordinary out of what you have. Salmon croquettes. The catch from a can. Salmon croquettes were proof that you didn't need a fancy fish market to eat well. For many mid-century families, the salmon came straight from a can, a small, affordable luxury tucked in the pantry beside the flour and Crisco. With a few clever hands and a hot skillet, that can of salmon became something golden, crispy, and worthy of a Sunday supper. The recipe was simple, which was part of its genius. Flaked canned salmon, breadcrumbs or crushed crackers, an egg, and a little onion came together into patties that sizzled in grease until perfectly browned. Housewives loved it because it stretched a single can into a full meal, and children loved it because, well, it tasted like comfort. Crunchy outside, tender inside, and always served with a dollop of tartar sauce or ketchup on the side. In the South, salmon croquettes were more than just a quick dinner. They were tradition. They might appear at breakfast next to grits and biscuits, or at supper beside a pot of stewed tomatoes or butter beans. For working families, it was a dish that felt fancy without the price tag, the kind of meal that made you feel cared for, even on the leanest week. Though their popularity waned in the age of fresh salmon fillets and seafood restaurants, croquettes are quietly making their way back into nostalgic kitchens. People are rediscovering what our grandparents knew all along, that canned food doesn't have to mean compromise. Fried to a crisp and served hot, salmon croquettes are a reminder of a time when thrift met creativity in the frying pan, and every simple bite carried the taste of ingenuity, love, and home. It's funny how the simplest meals could make the coldest nights feel warm. These forgotten fall dinners weren't just about food, they were about family, resourcefulness, and finding comfort in every bite. If you grew up with any of these dishes, or if you're planning to bring one back to your table, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more nostalgic recipes that taste like home.